My name is Gerald Morrow, and I was 63 years old the morning my daughter-in-law handed me a termination letter in front of 11 people who had worked beside me for years. The kitchen on Aldermore Street smelled the way it always did at 6:45 in the morning. Coffee, render fat, the faint sweetness of proofing dough from the bread station in the back. I had opened that kitchen every single morning for 21 years. I knew which burner on the range ran hot. I knew which shelf on the walk-in cooler dripped condensation overnight. I knew the sound the front door made when the latch caught in cold weather. None of that mattered to her. It never had. But here's what Renata did not know when she held out that letter with both hands like she was presenting something official. I already knew exactly what I was going to do. Welcome back to Channel, where the quiet ones finally get the last word. If you've ever built something from nothing and watched someone else try to sign their name to it, this story is for you. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. The restaurant was called Morrow's Table, and it had been on Aldermore Street in Harwick, Ohio since the spring of 2001. My wife, Dorothy, picked the name. She said it sounded like an invitation. She was right about most things. We had been married 31 years when she died of a pulmonary embolism on a Wednesday evening in October of 2018, for days after her 61st birthday. She had been at the restaurant that afternoon. She had tasted the butternut squash soup we were running as a weekly special and told me to add more nutmeg. Those were the last words she said to me about food. I added the nutmeg. I kept it on the menu through the end of that year because I could not bring myself to take it off. I had started the business with $42,000. 30 of it borrowed from my mother, 12 of it from a savings account Dorothy, and I had been building since 1993. There had been no investors, no family money, no silent partners. There was a lease, a used 6-burner commercial range for tables, and Dorothy's handwriting on the chalkboard out front. The building itself, a 2-story brick structure with a narrow side alley and a loading dock that faced a parking lot, belonged to a commercial landlord named Ferris Boyle, who had owned half the block since the 1980s. I leased the ground floor from him for 11 years. Then, in November 2012, Ferris Boyle decided he was done being a landlord. He called me on a Thursday morning at 9:15 and asked if I wanted to buy the building before he listed it. I said yes before he finished the sentence. My attorney at the time, Warren Chu of Chu and Pallister Property Law on Kellerman Avenue, handled the transaction. We closed on December 19, 2012 at 10:40 in the morning. I signed the deed in Warren's conference room, while Dorothy waited in the car with the heat running. When I came out and told her what I had paid, she covered her mouth with both hands and did not speak for a full 30 seconds. Then she said, "Gerald, that building is older than both of us put together." She was right about that, too. I did not advertise the fact that I owned the building. It was not a secret I kept deliberately. It was simply not information that came up. The tenants in the 2 upper floors, a bookkeeping firm and a small physical therapy practice, paid their rent to a property management company I had retained called Aldermore Asset Group. The invoices went through them. My name was not on any signage. To most people on Aldermore Street, I was the man who ran the restaurant on the ground floor. That was the whole story as far as anyone could see. My son, Daniel, had started working in the kitchen at 17. He washed dishes on weekends and learned to prep vegetables on Tuesday afternoons when his school schedule allowed. I taught him everything I knew about mise en place, about heat control, about the difference between cooking food and feeding people. By the time he was 25, he could run a dinner service without me. I was proud of that in the way that fathers are proud of things they cannot quite put into words, a quiet, settled kind of pride that lives somewhere in the chest and does not need to be announced. He met Renata at a hospitality conference in Columbus in the spring of 2016. She had a background in restaurant consulting and a business degree from a school in Pennsylvania. She was direct and confident, and she spoke about margins and table turn rates with the ease of someone who had memorized the language of the industry without having spent much time inside an actual kitchen. Daniel was taken with her immediately. I could see in the way he watched her when she talked. They married in June of 2017. Dorothy was still alive then. She danced at the reception in the parking lot of Morrow's Table, which we had strung with lights for the occasion. It was a warm night. The smell of the brick wall behind her, still holding the heat of the day, mixed with the scent of the flowers Dorothy had arranged in clay pots along the perimeter. I still have a photograph from that evening. Dorothy is laughing at something off camera, her head tilted back, one hand raised. In the months after the wedding, Renata began spending more time at the restaurant. At first it was weekends, then it was mornings, then it was daily. She would arrive at 7:15 with a notebook and a coffee she had purchased elsewhere, which I noticed but said nothing about, and she would sit at the corner table near the front window and write things down while the prep cook, Marcus, worked behind the pass. She had opinions about the menu. She shared them freely. She thought the portion sizes were generous to the point of being financially irresponsible. She thought the pricing structure was 15 to 20% below where it should be. She thought the decor was outdated and the brand identity was, in her word, grandfatherly. I listened. I adjusted where adjustment made sense. The price increase was reasonable, and I implemented it gradually over 18 months. The portion calibration I discussed with my kitchen manager, Vera Osei, a woman who had worked with me for 14 years and who had opinions of her own that I trusted. We found a middle ground that satisfied the math without hollowing out the plate. I paid Marcus Chen's wages every week for 9 years without a single missed payroll. I paid the cleaning company, Precision Commercial Services, every Friday morning by electronic transfer. I paid the linen rental, the pest control contract, the knife sharpening service that came on the second and fourth Monday of every month. I paid the liability insurance and the property insurance and the umbrella policy and the workers' compensation premium that renewed every April. I paid the accountant, David Stein of Stein and Farrow Accounting on Mercer Street, who had handled the restaurant's books since 2003 and who filed our taxes on March 15th of every year without exception. Dorothy had managed the front of house for the first 12 years. After she became ill, a different illness, a thyroid condition that drained her energy in 2014 and 2015, I hired a front-of-house manager named Claire Bouchard, who ran the dining room with a precision that Dorothy had approved of personally. Claire stayed on after Dorothy died. She was the one who put a candle on a host stand on the anniversary of Dorothy's passing each year without being asked. I noticed the first year and said nothing. She continued doing it anyway. In the late spring of 2022, Daniel came to me with a proposal. He and Renata wanted to take on more formal management roles. He framed it the way he framed most things, calmly, reasonably, with a list of practical points. They would handle operations, scheduling, vendor relationships, and menu development. I could step back to an advisory role, come in when I wanted to, take weekends off. The word he used was transition. My throat tightened when he said it. Though I kept my expression level, I was 62 years old. I was not tired. I had not said anything about stepping back. But Daniel was my son and Renata was his wife, and the restaurant had always been meant to continue past me. That was the original point. So I agreed to a gradual arrangement. I would reduce my hours. They would take primary responsibility for daily operations. I shook Daniel's hand in my own kitchen on a Tuesday morning in June of 2022 at approximately 10 o'clock, with the exhaust hood running and the smell of the cleaning solution we use on the line still faint in the air. The envelope of the restaurant's original deed, my copy Warren Chu's notation on the front in red ink, was in the fireproof lockbox of my home office on Carver Lane, where it had been since December of 2012. I thought about that envelope for exactly one moment as I shook my son's hand. Then I let the thought go and pour him a coffee. The changes began in July. Renata reordered the walk-in cooler without consulting Vera. She moved the dairy to a different shelf configuration that Vera said disrupted the prep flow. Vera told me about it on a Thursday morning at 7:30 while we were both standing near the bread station. The smell of the proofing loaves warm and dense around us. She didn't ask, Vera said. She just came in on Tuesday and moved everything. I said nothing. I made a note of it in the way I made notes of most things, without writing it down, without reacting, simply placing it on a shelf in my mind where I could return to it later. In August, Renata changed the supplier for our breakfast proteins. Eggs, bacon, the smoked salmon we serve on a weekend brunch menu, without running it past me or Marcus. The new supplier was cheaper. The quality was not equivalent. Marcus told me on the third Saturday of August, at 8:15 in the morning, that the eggs were not the same. I know, I said. What do you want me to do? Keep cooking, I said. I called our original supplier, Hendricks Farm Provision, the following Monday and apologized for the abrupt end of the relationship. Their account manager, a woman named Stephanie, said she understood. I filed that conversation in the same mental shelf. In September, Renata restructured the scheduling without consulting Claire. She reduced Claire's hours by 11 per week. Claire came to me on a Wednesday afternoon, the dining room quiet between lunch and dinner service, the smell of furniture polish on the tables, and the faint sound of the espresso machine cycling through its cleaning program. I think she's moving me out, Claire said. I looked at her across the table. Her hands were flat on the tablecloth. My chest went still in a way I recognized. The same stillness I felt at other moments in my life when something was happening that could not be undone. I'll look into it, I said. Gerald. She looked at me directly. She doesn't know you own the building, does she? I said nothing. Claire nodded once. That was the entire exchange. In October, Daniel came to me on a Sunday evening and told me that Renata felt my presence in the kitchen was affecting staff dynamics. He sat at my kitchen table on Carver Lane with a glass of water he had not touched, the overhead light making him look younger than he was, or older. I could not decide which. She thinks it sends a mixed message, he said, about who's in charge. I looked at my son. My hands stayed flat on the table. I built that kitchen, I said. I know, Dad. That's not the point. What is the point? He looked at his water glass. The point is we're trying to run a business, and having two authorities creates confusion. I said nothing. The kitchen on Carver Lane was quiet. The refrigerator hummed. Outside the window, the maple in the backyard had turned entirely, and the leaves were beginning to fall. All right, I said. He looked up. He seemed surprised I had agreed so quickly. People always were. I began reducing my hours in November. I came in 3 mornings a week instead of 5. I left before the lunch rush. I did not comment on the menu changes Renata continued to make. The removal of 3 dishes Dorothy had developed, the addition of a flatbread section that Marcus privately told me he found undignified, the new pricing on the weekend brunch that pushed the average check into a range that made our regular customers order less. In December, Marcus Chen told me he was leaving. He had been offered a position at a restaurant in Pittsburgh. We talked for 45 minutes on a Friday afternoon at 4 o'clock in the small office off the kitchen, the smell of the evening prep beginning to build on the other side of the door. Marcus had worked in my kitchen for 9 years. He had learned to make Dorothy's vinaigrette from memory. He cried a little when he talked about her. This isn't your kitchen anymore, he said. I don't mean that as an insult. I mean it as a fact. I put my hand on his shoulder. Go to Pittsburgh, I said. Something in me went very still after he left. I sat in that office for a long time. The evening service started beyond the door. I could hear the tickets beginning to print. January brought a vendor meeting that Renata organized without inviting me. I found out from David Stein, my accountant, who had received a copy of the meeting notes by accident because Renata had used the restaurant's primary email account, and he was still copied on the thread from a previous invoice question. She's renegotiating the linen contract. David told me on the phone on a Tuesday morning, and she's looking at a different cleaning service. I had used Precision Commercial Services for 16 years. I said nothing to David about what I was thinking. In February, Renata hired a new kitchen manager to replace Marcus. His name was Tyler, and he was 27 years old, and he had graduated from a culinary program 18 months earlier. He was not a bad cook. He was simply not ready. Vera told me this without judgment, standing by the loading dock on a cold Thursday morning in early February, the alley behind the building holding the smell of old brick and damp concrete. He doesn't know how to read a rush yet, Vera said. Give him time, I said. Renata told him he was overqualified for the position and that he should feel free to redesign the line setup. My stomach dropped. I kept my face even. He redesigned the line setup, Vera said. How is service running? Vera looked at me for a long moment. We're getting through it. I nodded once. I drove home on Aldermore Street and sat in my car in the driveway on Carver Lane for 11 minutes before going inside. In March, Renata began discussing the restaurant's rebrand with a design firm she had hired out of Columbus. Daniel mentioned it over dinner at my house on a Sunday in the middle of March. He said it in the casual way people mention things they hope will not start conversation. He said the firm was looking at a new logo, new interior design, a new name. I looked at him across the table. A new name, I said. She thinks Moro's table sounds dated. My voice was level. Dorothy named it. He looked at his plate. I know. I said nothing more about it that evening. But something in me had been settling into a shape for several months by then, and that conversation finished the shaping of it. I drove to Warren Chu's office on Kellerman Avenue the following morning at 8:45. I sat down across from him, and we talked for 1 hour and 17 minutes. When I left, I had a clear and specific understanding of my position. Warren had reviewed the lease agreement, the commercial lease between the building's owner and the restaurant operating entity, which had a renewal date of April 1st, 3 weeks away. The lease had a 60-day notice clause for non-renewal. That window had already passed. But it also had a standard provision that the building owner could decline to renew without cause, provided written notice was delivered no later than 30 days before the renewal date. The renewal date was April 1st. That gave me until March 2nd. It was March 14th when I left Warren's office. I asked Warren to look at the provision again. He read it twice. He looked up at me over his reading glasses. The 30-day window has passed, he said. The lease auto-renews unless you act. What are my options? He told me. I listened to all of them. Then I told him which one I wanted to use. I drove home from Warren's office and sat at the kitchen table on Carver Lane at 10:23 in the morning. The house was quiet. The maple in the backyard had new growth on it. Small, pale green leaves that had appeared in the last week, tentative against the gray March sky. I made a pot of coffee, and I sat with it, and I did not turn on the radio or look at my phone for a long time. The fireproof lockbox was in my home office, on the second shelf of the built-in bookcase beside the desk. I had not opened it since the previous spring, when I had retrieved a copy of the building insurance policy for an annual review. I went and got it. I carried it to the kitchen table and set it down. I unlocked it and lifted the lid. The restaurant deed was at the back, in a manila envelope with Warren Chu's red ink notation on the front. Moro/Aldermore ST/ recorded December 19th, 2012. I set it on the table and looked at it without opening it. Underneath, it was the original lease agreement between me and Ferris Boyle from 2001. Underneath that was a photograph Dorothy had taken on the morning we first opened. The front window of the restaurant with a chalkboard out front in her handwriting, the letters slightly uneven because she had been cold and wearing gloves. The photograph was overexposed at the edges. The center of it was sharp. I looked at the photograph for a long time. Dorothy had believed in the restaurant with specificity that I had always found both moving and slightly terrifying. She believed it would be there long after us. She believed Daniel would bring his own children through that kitchen someday. She had said this to me once, late on a Saturday night after a long service, while she was wiping down the prep counter with a cloth. She had not been looking at me when she said it. She had been looking at the kitchen. I thought about Marcus Chun on the bus to Pittsburgh. I thought about Claire's reduced hours. I thought about Tyler redesigning the line setup at 27 years old with 18 months of experience behind him. I thought about the design firm in Columbus looking at a new name for a restaurant that had Dorothy's name on it in the only way that mattered. I thought about the lease. I had paid property tax on that building every year since December 2012. I had replaced the HVAC system in the fall of 2017 at a cost that had made even Warren wince. I had repointed the brick on the north face in 2019. I had replaced the loading dock stairs in 2020. I had done all this quietly through Aldermore Asset Group without mentioning it to anyone in the restaurant because it was not the restaurant's business. It was the building's business. My business. The restaurant's lease was a commercial tenancy agreement between Aldermore Asset Group, acting on behalf of the building owner and Moro's Table LLC. The operating entity of the restaurant, which Daniel and Renata now controlled, leased the ground floor. They paid $11,200 a month. They had been paying that figure for 4 years because I had kept the rent stable deliberately, as an act of quiet support for my son's business. His business, not mine. The distinction had always been clear to me. I had wanted it to be his. What I had not anticipated was that the gift of the business would be interpreted as a transfer of everything, including the building, including the right to remove me, including the right to change Dorothy's name. I picked up my phone and called Aldermore Asset Group at 11:04 in the morning. I asked to speak with the managing director, a man named Phil Garrett whom I had worked with since 2013. Phil answered on the second ring. "Gerald," he said, "what can I do for you?" "I need to discuss the Aldermore Street ground floor lease." I said, "The renewal is coming up." A brief pause. "It auto-renews April 1st unless we send notice." "I know," I said. "What do we need to do to avoid the auto-renewal?" Phil was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was careful. "Gerald, that's your son's restaurant." "I know what it is," I said. Another pause. "I'll pull the file," he said. "Give me until this afternoon." Phil called me back at 2:57. He confirmed what Warren had already told me. The 30-day window had technically passed. Auto-renewal was a default, but the lease also contained a rarely used landlord option, a vacancy and rebrand clause that Ferris Boyle's original attorney had inserted in 2001, which permitted the building owner to decline renewal if the tenant intended to materially alter the trade name or identity of the business operating on the premises. Renata's design firm in Columbus had submitted a preliminary proposal to change the name and logo of Moro's Table. Phil found the email in the lease correspondence file. Renata had CC'd the building management address by mistake, along with the restaurant's primary accounts, when she had sent the design firm the go-ahead. I sat with that for a long time. Then I told Phil what I wanted to do. He said he would prepare the paperwork. I also called David Stein that afternoon at 4:15 and asked him to pull the full accounts payable history for the building. Every invoice, every payment, every renewal, going back to 2012. David said he would have it ready by Friday. I continued paying the restaurant's utility subsidy through Aldermore Asset Group that week. I continued the arrangement where I had been quietly covering a portion of property tax differential so that the restaurant's rent did not reflect the full market rate. I did not change anything yet. I simply made sure I knew exactly where everything stood. Renata had no idea the lease was in question. There was no reason she would. The renewal was handled entirely through Aldermore Asset Group. The correspondence went to a management email address she did not monitor. The invoices came from a company name she had seen on monthly statements but had never investigated. She paid the rent by automatic transfer every first of the month, and that was the extent of her relationship with the building. In the third week of March, she called a staff meeting. I was not invited. Vera told me about it afterward, on a Tuesday morning at 7:45, while we both stood near the loading dock with coffees. The maple tree on the Aldermore Street side of the building was fully leafed now, its shadow making a pattern on the brick wall. She told the staff the restaurant is entering a new chapter, Vera said. She used those words. New chapter. What else? She said some roles would be evolving. She said the space itself was going to look different by summer. She showed them a slide from the design firm. Vera looked at her coffee. The new name is Table Renata. My breath caught. I set my coffee down on the dock railing. She's naming it after herself, I said. Yes. I said nothing. The alley smelled of brick and cold air and the faint diesel of the delivery truck that had come at 6:30. I stood there for a moment, and then I picked up my coffee again. Vera, I said, how much longer do you plan to stay? She looked at me. Depends on what happens. Give me until April. She nodded. Daniel came to dinner at Carver Lane on the last Thursday of March. We ate roast chicken. He talked about the rebrand with a kind of managed enthusiasm, the way a person talks about something they've agreed to support but have not entirely made peace with. He said Renata had found a contractor for the interior renovation. He said the new logo was almost finalized. He said the transition would happen in stages. She's thinking May for the official rebrand launch, he said. I passed him the bread. That's ambitious, I said. She's organized. She is, I agreed. He looked at me the way he sometimes did when he was trying to read me and could not quite manage it. You're being very calm about all this. I'm always calm, I said. I know. He set his fork down. Are you okay, Dad? I looked at my son across the table. He was 35 years old, and he had his mother's forehead and his father's hands, and he was sitting in the kitchen on Carver Lane, where he had eaten dinner 3 or 4 nights a week for most of his childhood. My chest went still in a way that had nothing to do with anger. I'm fine, Daniel, I said. Eat your chicken. On the morning of March 28th, a Friday, Warren Chu filed formal notice with Aldermore Asset Group's legal department. The notice invoked the vacancy and rebrand clause. It documented the tenant's stated intention to materially alter the trade name and brand identity of the business operating on the premises. It included a copy of the design firm's preliminary proposal, which had been submitted to the building management address. It was time-stamped at 9:14 in the morning. Phil Garrett called me at 9:47. It's filed, Gerald. Thank you, I said. What happens when they call? They'll call you, I said. Refer them to Warren. Phil was quiet for a moment. Gerald, your son is going to call you. I know. What are you going to tell him? I thought about Dorothy standing in the cold in front of that chalkboard. I thought about Marcus Chan and the vinaigrette. I thought about Claire's candle on the host stand every October. I'm going to tell him the truth, I said, when the time is right. Phil's assistant, a woman named Jody Brand who had managed the Aldermore account since 2015, prepared the formal non-renewal letter and sent it by certified mail to the restaurant's address of record. It arrived on March 31st, a Monday, at 11:22 in the morning. The delivery required a signature. The front-of-house staff member who signed for it took it to Renata. Renata opened it at the host stand. I was not there. Vera called me at 11:39. She opened a letter. Vera said, "She's been standing at the host stand for 4 minutes without moving." I said nothing. She just called someone. Vera said, "I think it's a lawyer." Something in me settled into a stillness that felt, for the first time in several months, like relief. Renata called me at 12:03. The kitchen on Carver Lane smelled of the morning's coffee, still faintly warm on the burner. I was sitting at the table. I let the phone ring twice. Then I answered. Gerald. Her voice was controlled. Tight but controlled. "I need you to explain something to me." "All right," I said. "We received a letter from Aldermore Asset Group. It references a vacancy and rebrand clause. It says our lease is not being renewed." A pause. "Do you know anything about this?" I said nothing. Gerald. "Yes," I said. A long silence. "What do you mean, yes?" "I mean, yes, I know about it." "How do you know about it?" I looked at the manila envelope on the kitchen table, the one with Warren Chu's red ink notation on the front. "Renata," I said, "who do you think owns the building?" The silence that followed was different from the earlier ones. It had a different weight. "The building is owned by a property group," she said. "Aldermore Asset," she stopped. "Asset Group," I said. "Yes." "You." The word came out flat. Not a question. A calculation arriving at its conclusion. Since December 19th, 2012, I said, Warren Chu handled the transaction. It's recorded at the county recorder's office. You're welcome to verify. I heard her breathing. "I'm going to need a moment," she said. "Take your time," I said. She did not take her time. "This is retaliation. You're doing this because of the rebrand." "I'm invoking a clause in the lease agreement," I said. "The clause has been in that agreement since 2001. I didn't write it. Ferris Boyle's attorney did. You can't just, this is Daniel's Restaurant. Daniel's Restaurant leases the ground floor of my building." I said, "That has always been the arrangement. I kept the rent below market rate for 4 years as a gift to my son. The lease still requires renewal. We have a contractor. We have a design firm. We have—" "I know," I said. "I know about Table Renata." Another silence. Longer this time. "Daniel is going to hear about this," she said. "He is." I agreed. She went quiet again. I could hear something in the background, a chair moving or a door. Then she said, "What do you want?" I had thought about this question for 2 weeks. I had written out on a piece of paper and then thrown the paper away because I did not need the paper. The answer was not complicated. I want the restaurant's name to remain Morrow's Table, I said. I want Claire Bouchard restored to her original hours with no change in seniority. I want the original suppliers reviewed by Vera Osei and any changes to the kitchen supply chain approved by her. And I want to come back to the kitchen on my own terms, on my own schedule, for as long as I choose to. And if we don't agree, then the lease does not renew, I said, and I will need the space returned by May 1st. Phil Garrett at Aldermore Asset Group will handle the logistics. I heard her set the phone down on a hard surface. I heard her walk away from it. I heard, very faintly, the sound of the kitchen at Morrow's Table in the background, the exhaust hood, the midday prep, the particular sound that a working kitchen makes at 12:15 on a Tuesday when it is getting ready to feed people. I sat at the table on Carver Lane. My hands were still. Outside the window, the maple was casting its full spring shadow across the backyard. I thought about nothing in particular for a few minutes. Then I heard her pick the phone back up. Daniel called me at 12:41. His voice was quieter than I had expected. "Dad," he said. "Daniel." She told me. "I know. You own the building." "Yes." A long pause. When he spoke again, his voice was uneven in a way I had not heard since he was very young. "Why didn't you tell me?" My throat tightened. Would it have changed anything? I said. He was quiet for a moment. "I don't know," he said. "Neither do I," I said. He came to Carver Lane that evening. He came alone. We sat at the kitchen table for 3 hours. We talked about his mother. We talked about the restaurant. We talked about the night he had run his first dinner service alone at 25, and I had stood in the alley behind the loading dock and listened through the exhaust vent because I could not bring myself to leave. He had not known I was there. I told him now. His face went still for a moment. Then something moved across it that I did not name. "She'll agree to your terms," he said finally. "I know," I said. "She doesn't have a choice." "Neither of us had a choice," I said. "That's the point." He nodded. He stayed for dinner. We ate the last of the roast chicken from Thursday. It was better the second day, as it usually is. The lease renewed on April 1st under revised terms at Warren Chu and Renata's attorney, a commercial litigator named Paul Everly of Everly & Shin on 5th Street in Columbus, negotiated over 3 days of phone calls. The new agreement included a trade name protection clause that required written consent from the building owner before any material change to the restaurant's name or brand identity. Warren told me it was an unusual provision for a commercial tenancy. He said it was also completely enforceable. Claire Bouchard was restored to her original hours on April 7th. She did not mention the episode. She came in at her usual time, organized a reservation book, and put a small pot of narcissus on the hose stand because it was spring and she thought it suited the window. She had always done things like that. She continued to do them. Vera Osei met with the original vendor accounts in the second week of April. The protein supplier, Hendricks Farm and Provision, agreed to restore the account. Stephanie, the account manager, said she had not given the slot to anyone permanent yet. I suspected she had been waiting, though I had not asked her to. Tyler, the new kitchen manager, proved steadier than I had initially assessed. By May, he had found the rhythm of a rush without being told how to look for it. Vera told me this on a Thursday morning. I filed in the same mental place where I kept the things that turned out better than expected. I returned to the kitchen on the second Monday of April. I came in at 6:30, which had always been my time. The coffee was already made. Marcus was in Pittsburgh and would not be coming back, but the kitchen smelled the way it had always smelled at that hour. Coffee, the warmth of the equipment cycling on, the particular stillness of a kitchen preparing to open. I stood at the pass for a moment and looked at the line and said nothing. Then I put on my apron and started the prep list. Renata and I did not speak for approximately 3 weeks after the agreement was signed. When we did speak, it was about operational matters, briefly and without hostility. I did not feel the need to discuss what had happened. She did not appear to feel the need either. That suited me. Daniel came by the kitchen on a Wednesday morning in late April. He stood at the pass the way he had stood there at 17, when he was learning to read a ticket. He watched me work for a few minutes without speaking. "Mom would have enjoyed this," he said finally. My hands went still on the cutting board for exactly 1 moment. She would have been insufferable about it. I said. He laughed. It was a real laugh, sudden and a little surprised, the kind that a person does not plan. I had not heard him laugh like that in some time. Gerald Morrow, 63 years old, and still in his kitchen on Aldermore Street every morning that the door needs opening. That is what it looks like when a man builds something that is genuinely his. Not the paperwork. Not the deed on file at the county recorder's office. The fact that after 21 years, he still knows which burner runs hot. He still knows the sound the front door makes in cold weather. He still knows what belongs in the window and what does not. The building was always secondary to that. I came in at 6:30 on a Thursday in May, and there was a pot of narcissus on the host stand from the week before, a little past its prime now, the petals beginning to soften at the edges. I moved it to the kitchen windowsill, where the morning light hit it directly. It lasted another 4 days. That is what I remember about spring that year. Not the lease, not the letter, not Renata's face when the word arrived that the building had an owner she had never thought to ask about, the flowers on the windowsill. What would you have done that Tuesday morning in March, when you held the deed in the 30-day window and the name that someone else was planning to erase? Drop a comment and tell me where you would have drawn the line. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. If you like this story, join our community by hitting that like button and subscribing for more real, raw, and family-centered stories. And as always, thank you for being a part of this sphere.